Okay, so I've been kind of sitting on this one for a while. And part of that is just I wanted to make sure I had time to really think about my experience before I put it into words and made a video on it. Part of it is also just haven't really had the time to make the video, but I think I finally have the time. I know the dogs are outside. Journey has been barking a lot, so I apologize ahead of time. There are probably going to be a few times where I'm going and I'm in the middle of a point, and then you just hear outside, and I'm apologizing ahead of time. But it's time that I finally talk about the class of '09, the flip side. But before I get into the flip side specifically, I want to talk a little bit about Class of '09 and Class of '09 the re-up and why I enjoyed them so much. For me, the first big reason is I love them because of that refuge in audacity. Nicole is an awful fucking person, but she's so awful, and the situations she finds herself in are often so absurd that they kind of loop around to becoming funny. Just a few, I've got a whole script to read from, but a few that really stick to mind are, number one, when she starts dealing crack to as part of her civics assignment, and anytime she sells to someone, she's like, by the way, can you sign my sheet so it looks like I'm doing my homework and I'm getting my hours in? And by the end of that arc, her teacher ends up buying crack from her. There's the Mein Kampf storyline, which is probably my favorite, where she is convinced that her teacher is racist against black people. So she's like, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to write a paper. And I'm just going to plagiarize Mein Kampf. But anytime Hitler is talking about the Jews and the state of Israel, I'm just going to replace it with black or African American. And I bet she's going to love my paper. And she loves it so much that she ends up hosting this event to read Nicole's paper to show this is what the remedial class is all about. We can instill passion and change and create work, and it's comedy gold. The whole fucking straight club scene, that shit had me cracking up because, again, just how fucking bizarre of a concept that was. And of course, all of the white nationalist arcs from the first game. I just remember playing that scene when Nicole's like, what is this, like the Celtics logo? No, that's the Celtic cross. And then Clay from the other room over just goes, wait, is her teacher a white nationalist? And that's how that arc started. It was fucking amazing. But just because these games are really funny, and again, how absurd and bizarre they are, it doesn't mean it's all fun and games. There are a lot of arcs in the first two games that are just unpleasant to read. There's the route where Nicole ends up becoming homeless and becomes a prostitute who is not getting paid in money, but she gets paid in drugs and in pills, so she can use that to numb herself and dull the pain, so it just becomes easier to keep doing this. That's a really fucked up arc. In some of the other ones, you've got her dating her gym teacher, and then she ends up getting murdered. You get the one where she tries being nice to her fellow students, which leads to them expecting a relationship with her and leads to them expecting sex from her. And because she's like, no, I'm not going to do that. I don't see you that way. What the fuck is wrong with you? It leads to all these rumors being spread about her, and it all becomes too much, and it leads to her committing suicide. None of these above situations are funny. To me, they do a really good job of juxtaposing, sorry, it's just always a funny word to say, juxtapose. But they juxtapose the absurd situations, and they kind of keep the story grounded. And as funny as Nicole is and her story is, it is also a very tragic one. I don't think she ever recovered from walking in and seeing her father's suicide, especially seeing the note that said it's Nicole's fault, and her never getting closure on that. To me, she was someone who was already damaged from the divorce, all the constant moves, the fact that all these different men were coming into her life, but none of them ever really stuck around. The fact that she has one friend group, then she moves, and I have to readjust, I have to readjust, I have to readjust. And there's also the implication that whether it is her mother's boyfriends, whether it's teachers, is that she's always been a victim of groomers. And it's that moment with her dad that I think finally completely broke her. Not to say this all makes Nicole wholly sympathetic, it's still Nicole. But her actions become a lot more understandable and a lot more interesting with all of the context and the backstory. And to me, that's why the first two games work. Then we get to the flip side. To me, the big problem is that it lacks that juxtaposition. There's not... Like I was saying, in the first two games, you've got the really hard-hitting shit, and then here's the goofy shit. The flip side is just the hard-hitting shit. There's one route that has some goofy shit to it, and even then, it has arguably the most fucked up ending out of any of the routes. So, your basic setup for all of it is Jekka is living with her abusive father. He's screaming at her. He constantly threatens to hit her, to throw her out. To me, there is an implication that it is more than just threats, because she'll be like, oh my god, don't hit me. And I don't know how much of that is just like him screaming like, I'm gonna fucking knock your teeth in, if she's afraid that he'll do it. Or to me, it sounds like, no, he has done this before. He has been physically abusive. And that's why whenever he gets like that, she's like, no, there's credibility to his threats. And then she just like retreats and gets fucking terrified. He constantly insults her mother by saying that she's a whore. He insinuates that Jekka will be the same. And if he gets wind of her becoming the same, he will beat the shit out of her and he'll like knock the whore out of her. Every route is Jekka trying to appease her abuser and finding herself in these awful predicaments. In one route, she becomes a sex worker who steps on men that have a foot fetish while grappling with the fact that, oh my god, I am actually becoming a whore. The thing that my dad has always been like, this is what your mom is, like, it's in your DNA, you better not fucking do this, I will stop you from doing it. It's like, oh my god, this is actually what I'm doing, and I am not okay with it. Which, either leads to this all becoming too much, and she commits suicide, because of, again, there's the mental stress of it, people start coming to her house and demanding more and more and more of her. Then she walks in on her dad getting the same treatment from Nicole, and she finally breaks. Or Nicole ends up getting in on the business, starts taking advantage of Jeffrey, because it's Nicole. Of course she's going to do this, which ends up getting Jeffrey killed. And Jekka is not only feeling responsible for the death of someone else because she could have called 911 to save Jeffrey. Nicole's like, I kind of also gave him some of your prescriptions, so you could call the cops, and I'm going down. You're going down too. So how about you put the fucking phone down? So Jekka has to deal with the fact that, in addition to all the stress of this, I am responsible for someone's death. And also, that guy was responsible for most of my income. So I don't know what the fuck I'm gonna do now. So that's a fun route. That's a fun couple routes and endings. The next one is she gets a job at Hot Topic, which she finds so draining that the only way she can really feel any semblance of joy in her life is to start drinking alcohol and going to parties, which ends up leading to her drinking and driving, because either she's like, I'm not going to call my dad, I know the shit he's going to say, let me drive. Or you call her dad, the dad doesn't answer, and she's like, well, I'm gonna go ahead and drive because I feel like if I stick around here, someone is going to take advantage of me. They're trying. They come up to me, they start saying shit, and the more I drink, the harder it is for me to say no. And I'm not letting that self happen. I'm not letting that happen to myself. And at the conclusion of that route, from drinking and driving, she ends up killing Ari. So someone still ends up dying. Shit that is going to end up on her conscience. There's another route where Jekka starts dating her history teacher so she can pass her class, but she ends up just getting disgusted over, again, kind of what she's doing and also the power that her teacher has over her. And there is some real, it's not to say that, oh yeah, this is comfortable and fine and then it gets weird. It's weird and icky, but when he starts being like, yeah, who's my baby girl, and putting her in really small clothes, baby clothes and shit, I'm like, oh, I hate this. Yeah, it's the fact that he calls her his little girl, and also just knowing if I tell my dad about this, about what's going on, he's just gonna call me a whore and beat the shit out of me and or throw me out of the house. If I keep doing this, I'm just mentally and emotionally going to break. I don't have an out. Sorry, I kind of blanked for a second because there's two different ways this route can go, if I'm remembering it correctly, because it's either she does super shitty in class, so she has to get the job at Hot Topic, or she keeps going along with her teacher. And something I noticed by doing the teacher version of the route, there are a few lines from Nicole where she was like, oh yeah, I'm kind of hung out with Jeffrey, and I don't know, I'm gonna go hang out with Crispin. I'm like, there's one route in the first game where she actually does that. I believe it was the first route I ever did of Class of 09. Oh, I know how this route ends. And by the end of the route, not only is Jekka emotionally fucked up from the relationship with her teacher, not only is she emotionally fucked up because her dad found out and started threatening her, but she's now also emotionally fucked up because her only friend committed suicide. And something really interesting to me about this route is there's no ending monologue. And this was also the last one I got in the game, but every other route, in every other Class of 09 game, there's that long ending monologue from Nicole or here Jekka talking about what happens and them musing on the situation. This one doesn't have it. It just kind of ends and kind of stops. Like I said, there's only one route that's kind of fun to read. So Jekka ends up getting a job at FYE, but she's working there with Kelly, and Kelly is her manager, but because the systems are down, they're not getting paid. Jekka's like, I need money because my dad's gonna beat the fucking shit out of me. So she and Kelly go on this scavenger hunt about FYE because they go to one of the other stores which sells all the porn, and the counselor works there, and he's like, oh yeah, teachers have to get jobs to pay during the summer, and that's kind of a funny joke. But he gives them this riddle where if they follow the riddle, they can find FYE's massive stash of illegal porn. So they do this really long scavenger hunt to find this shit. I'm like, finally, here's the goofy, bizarre, absurdist shit that I have come to love about Class of 09. Okay, let's do it. And then you get to the stash of illegal porn, which does have a pretty, it's funny, but a really fucked up joke about Dan Schneider. I'm like, oh. But, they get there, and then Kelly's like, man, fuck all this shit, just kill me. So the counselor pulls out a gun and fucking kills her, then is about to kill Jekka. The FBI come in, kill him, and are like, yeah, we did it, we found the illegal porn. Now it belongs to the government. Yeah, sorry, kid, we kind of have to ensure that you never tell anybody. Don't kill me! we're not going to kill you. We're just going to send you to the Taliban as a sex slave. So that's how the route ends. She gets sold into slavery, and there are no good endings to this game. And not to say that the other route, again, like, the other games are all sunshine and rainbows, but they're at least, it feels like there's at least a few endings that are kind of good, or at least really interesting. Like, one of my favorite endings is, it's one of the Ari endings. It might be both Ari endings, actually. Where it's not like, man, this is a really bad ending, but the one where Nicole really is just kind of musing on the nature of relationships and on her relationship with Ari is so interesting to me. This one, the only one that comes to me kind of close as, like, you know, an interesting musing is the end of the route where Jeffrey dies, especially when you get the message from his mom and she's like, hey, thanks for finding my son. I don't know, I'm almost kind of relieved that he's gone because I knew he was really a loser that was never going to amount to anything. And, like, I love my son, but there was nothing I can do for him. And at least now I don't have to worry. Like, what the fuck? Yay! Like, oh shit, man. Sorry, I was paying attention to my notes again. Like I was saying, there's 5 endings, and all of them are fucking bad. Someone dies in every route. And I feel like, yeah, at least some of Nicole's endings and storylines, even if they're not good, they're at least kind of neutral. There is no good or even neutral ending for Jekka. Watching Nicole is entertaining and genuinely interesting, but watching Jekka is just sad. Now, moving on to, like, the themes of the story, and I think the author's intent, admittedly, I feel like this is all kind of the point. Class of 09 is first and foremost, it's about telling stories that the creator was aware of, either personally or secondhand. And while the series is known for, again, how fucking funny it can be, these stories are often deeply tragic in nature. This installment chose to emphasize the tragedy of the stories rather than the humor. And as funny as it can be, and there are, again, genuinely some, like, funny moments and, like, bits of dialogue, these are the stories of people who have had to endure this shit. And it's a story made for them that went through it. It's a story for people who are going through something similar, and a story for people who will endure something similar in the future, to let them know that you are seen and you're loved. That's how I interpret it and what I get out of it. And while I didn't necessarily enjoy reading it, I don't know if I was supposed to, so it has my respect. But there is an element of the game, and this one in particular that doesn't apply in the other two, that kind of doesn't get my respect. And it's the weird live-action ARG-esque bullshit about God is watching, and oh, God isn't watching, and God's not here, and you're God. You're the one making them do all these horrible things, and all of these stories, and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, we're doing this? Really? Me personally, I don't know what other people think about it. I know what at least one other person does, because I talked to my friend Lily about it. I think it's lame, and I think it's so pretentious without being interesting. Just that whole, it's like, yeah, you're the one making all these decisions for the characters. I'm like, okay. If you want to pull something like that in the first game or the second game, where there are a lot of options, like when Nicole has the option to tell Kyler, I only date guys who can walk, and the player has input into that specifically, you can shit on me for being a terrible person and being like, yeah, I want to see how these decisions play out. I'll give you that. There's barely any decisions to be made in this game. Like, the FYE route doesn't have decisions. So you can't really talk shit to me, the player, for like, oh, you're making these bad decisions. God isn't watching you, but like, you're the god of the blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, not really, because there weren't decisions to make. And even still, I don't feel like, yeah, I said I didn't want to date my teacher. That doesn't mean I wanted to go drunk driving. There's an option to choose that. Yeah, there's also an option to call your dad, which doesn't do anything, so she goes drunk driving anyways. So, no, I don't have control over this shit. I had control to say to Nicole, tell you what, fine, you can do this job with me, and we can share the profits. I had no input over what Nicole did to Jeffrey. I had no input over Jekka choosing not to call the cops. And that, again, that's my problem. It's like, I'm not crazy. Let me rephrase this. That idea of chastising the player for the choices they make and how inhuman it can seem is interesting, and I've seen VNs that do it right. I think it works in a story like Doki Doki Literature Club, because in that story, it's particularly the absence of choice for both Monica and the player that is a central theme and identity, like aspect of the story. It really works in a story like Totono, because the decision to play another route after finishing Miyuki's is that act of betrayal, and it's worked into the narrative. That is something you, the player, actively chose to do. And there's so many outs that Miyuki kind of gives you that you as the player choose not to take. And like, okay, you made the bed, you're gonna fucking lie in it. If that game wants to tell me you're a piece of shit for what you did, and the game kind of does, it feels justified and really interesting. When a game doesn't really give you choices and then says, you're a fucking awful person for making the choices we didn't really give you, again, it feels really lame and really pretentious. And that's not how I often view this series. And like that, it sticks out, and not in a good way. So that's most of this. So now I just get to give my conclusion. To me, the scene that sums up Class of 09 thematically is the true ending. I call it the true ending because it's the last thing you can get. The true ending of the first game. Between Nicole, Jekka, and Jeffrey after graduation. When, through that conversation, you have Jeffrey is expressing his loneliness and how, being a loser is not fucking easy. The fact that I have to deal with people like you for years, constantly making fun of me, not letting me feel like a fucking person, hurts. You could never understand this. And then you have Nicole saying, being popular is really hard because people don't see you for you. They see you for the idea of you. Yeah, I'm pretty. I'm attractive. Do you know what comes with that? It comes with people, both my classmates, potential friends, and fucking teachers and people in authority using that authority and using like what's the word I wanted? I almost said veneer. That's not quite right. I guess the illusion of friendship to manipulate me into giving me what they want. They don't see me as a person either. This is something you could never understand. It's still kind of funny, but it very much shows the tragedy of these characters and is able to ground them. This is a story about people's stories. And that last scene in the first game, I think, does that really well. It's funny and deeply sad at the same time. The flip side is more deeply sad than it is funny. Excuse me. And because of that, It's easily my least favorite of the trilogy, but I do think it's still an important addition to the trilogy. I think it's a worthy addition to the trilogy. But as of my rankings, I would probably go 2, 1, 3. I think that's about it.